used to work in AWS. I worked in availability of application load balancing, and everything we used there was essentially hosted internally. I had a good sense of how much an observability system should cost internally. Honeycomb published a blog post, how much should companies be spending for observability? And they, I believe, mentioned somewhere around 20 to 30%. And I think that's, usually where you end up when you use Honeycomb or Datadog. I was under the impression, building internally, that it should be single digit percentages. We've run into customers where they pay more for Datadog than they pay for their compute. It's fascinating.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jay. I'm the CEO of Highlight. With me, we have Esplin, the producer of this podcast and an engineer on our team. And last but not least, Kevin, a good friend of Highlight and the co-founder and CEO at Nimbus, an observability optimization platform. Kevin, welcome.
Thanks, Jay. Excited to be on.
Cool. Well, Kevin, let's start with just an overview of what you do at Nimbus. Give us the quick pitch and I think, me and Esplin have a lot of, thoughts about the observability world. So I'm sure it'll be a great conversation.
Yeah, I think we all do, which is why we're in this space.
Yeah.
In a short byline, I would say Nimbus, what we do is we help organizations save on using Datadog. On average, that's 60%. And what companies do, they integrate with us. We run an observability pipeline. We proxy right now their logs, and we find ways of optimizing the billable volume by 80-90% without dropping data. And that's how we do cost optimization.
Wow. And do you save the money because of things like egress costs from the VPC of the customer? Or are you saving it because you say you're not dropping data, but I'll just say it anyway. Or are you saving it because you're dropping useless data that the customer wouldn't ever want to see, query against in the first place?
Yeah, so the way we save, generally, when you look at observability vendors and what they bill you on, it's either gigabytes or it's number of events. Egress is funny because every vendor that you send data to, you do pay egress costs that most companies are not even aware that that's part of the bill, because It doesn't show up, on your Datadog bill or your Honeycomb bill. It shows up on your AWS bill. And where we essentially help optimize is both on kind of the ingest size as well as the number of events. And in detail, what that means is we find common log groups. So if you take a look at your logs, a lot of your logs are going to be very similar from each other. Think health checks. Most health checks are basically the same message with a little bit of difference in metadata. Or think logs are kind of part of a trace. It's part of a sequence. Once again, the metadata is basically the same. So what our pipeline can do is we can recognize those sort of log groups. And instead of sending, let's say, 500 health checks every second, we can aggregate it into a single log with all the metadata deduplicated and essentially send one log. And when we do that, what it means is it's a 500x reduction in event size and usually 30 or 40% reduction in event size in gigabytes. And
Understood.
That's how we achieve for savings. We still have all the same data, but we basically give it to you in an aggregated, deduplicated format.
Is that problematic if the company or the vendor that I use charges by gigabytes, not lines?
So that's where I say it works on both ends. So in terms of gigabytes, we reduce by 30 and 40%. And in terms of events, we can be dramatically better. Understood. In the sense of 500x, 600x.
So do you have to then, are you just running a server that buffers all that, catches all the events, collapses them, and then sends the collapsed events off to Datadog?
Essentially what we run is an observability pipeline. And it's rather a new thing in the industry, I think. People are starting to get used to the idea, but think of data pipelines in kind of the modern data stack world, where you have a bunch of data, you send it through a pipeline so you can enrich it, optimize it, transform it before you send it to your data warehouse. The observability pipeline kind of does that same job, but with observability data. And normally, it's been mostly used just for routing. In enterprises, they usually don't use one vendor, but 3, 4, 5 different vendors. And so they'll use an observability pipeline to send data to one place so it can be routed to a whole bunch of places. We're essentially putting another layer on top of that of, hey, we have a pipeline. Let's do something smarter than just piping the data. Let's optimize it. So you can almost think, like, the way I like to think about it is like you have compilers that can compile code into like more efficient, leaner, better code. The observability pipeline, especially the ones that we run, kind of does that same thing to observability data.
How does this relate, Kevin, to OpenTelemetry? Yeah, because I remember, I feel like the last time that we had a lengthy conversation, I feel like we chat every once in a while, but the longer conversation, maybe it was at KubeCon last year, we talked a lot about OpenTelemetry. And yeah, just remind me, how is that relevant to what you're doing? Is the pipeline you've built based on OpenTelemetry, or is it just that you accept OpenTelemetry data coming out of those customers' accounts? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so in terms of OpenTelemetry, where we integrate is, yes, we accept OpenTelemetry data.
Got it.
So we can take it in input and send it to whatever the output is. And the second part, this isn't something we currently support, but we have had requests for it and we're looking into it, is certain vendors, they might accept OpenTelemetry data, but if you instrument with their SDKs, those SDKs are not necessarily compatible with OpenTelemetry. It's kind of a one-way compatibility. Datadog is the most famous example of this, where if you instrument using Datadog SDKs, that's not going to be compatible to send it to an OpenTelemetry backend. And they've been famously resistant of adding a receiver in that. And so one of the things we're looking at is essentially collecting native Datadog, metrics, logs, and traces, and then essentially converting that to OpenTelemetry in the backend.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Cool. And then how does someone integrate with you, Kevin? How let's say we wanted to do this with our Datadog metrics usage, right? Does your pipeline run in my AWS account, or do I just send it to you instead of sending it to Datadog? What does like the onboarding process look like?
Today, we run a cloud service. So essentially you send it to us instead of Datadog. We are also currently working on a cloud prem solution where essentially we can run it inside of your VPC.
Got it.
And that'll be probably around late Q2 or Q3 this year.
Yeah. Any interesting customer stories to share, just like the last year of running the company?
I think for me, what's been interesting is, so my background in observability has mostly been in big tech side. I used to work in AWS. I worked in availability of application load balancing, and everything we used there was essentially hosted internally. And from that, I had a good sense of how much an observability system should cost internally. And then I think it was more of just a sticker shock of essentially going into commercial vendors and seeing how much observability can actually cost. I think Honeycomb published a blog post like 2-3 years ago. It's a little self-serving, but essentially doing like a baseline of how much should companies be spending for observability. And they, I believe, mentioned somewhere around 20 to 30%. And it's funny because that percentage is used by everyone, but I believe Honeycomb, was made it in a blog post, and that's become a standard. And I think that's, usually where you end up when you use Honeycomb or Datadog. And then if you use other vendors, you might be in like the 10 to 20%. I was under the question, building internally, that it should be single-digit percentages, but it's just different priorities, and maybe that's kind of besides the point. But in terms of customer stories, I think one thing that I have found, you hear lots of stories of, for vendors, especially Datadog, how expensive it is. But, we've run into customers where they pay more for Datadog than they pay for their compute. And it's fascinating. But
I feel like it's a bit like like paradoxical to me though at the same time, where I'm like, when a company is being complained about that much because their users complain it's expensive, they must be doing their product must be good. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, otherwise I feel like it would just be easy for anyone to sort of just steal that market share. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, I would say Datadog has built a great product. The way that I kind of describe them is they're they have breadth in the sense that their whole kind of market go-to market is a single pane of glass for all your systems. And what works particularly well, I think, for them is they have probably second to none in terms of developer experience, in terms of ease of use, integrations into basically any service that you might use. They have custom built integrations that you can install in a click. And hey, now you have Kubernetes visibility. Now you have Nginx. Now you have dashboards. Now you have alarms. Very few companies can match that because they have hundreds of engineers just working on integrations. And for most other observability companies, that's like all the engineers that they have.
Yeah. I agree. It's an interesting bet they took, and it really worked out. I heard a lot of that had to do with just the move to the cloud and the fact that now like as a business that wants to move quickly, I'm depending on so many external third-party services, not just like the servers that are running on my like own on-prem instance or whatever it is, right? That it sort of warranted a new set of tooling around it, and I guess it really worked out for them. So that's pretty cool.
It did. Though it's funny because they also have some very anti-cloud pricing, if you will. I think Datadog started off originally as metrics. They were really well known for the metrics, and they charged per host, which maybe back in the day of like single tenant hosts was okay, but in the world of microservices and Kubernetes, where your host count can double very easily during scale ups, it's been definitely something that it's one of the most frequent complaints about Datadog.
Yeah. I totally get why that would be annoying, because it's like no matter how much value a given host is giving me, I have to just pay a flat fee, and then I have to pay usage on top of it. But anyway, yeah. Speaking of cloud costs, someone sent this to me recently, which I thought was really interesting. It was about like why observability was so expensive, and I kind of like agreed with a lot of the things. It's also again like a little self-fulfilling, similar to that honeycomb thing you mentioned, but I agreed with a lot of the points. One of the things was like, when you're an engineering team, you want to send a lot of data back because it's sort of like you don't know retroactively what you'll want to have ahead of time or like after the fact. You know what I'm saying? Like after an issue happens, having extra data is always safer than having less data. So that's one thing that they talk about. But then they also talk about like the open source kind of like things that are taking over and how that's sort of like changing things a little bit. So it's an interesting world, but I think I kind of do agree with the honeycomb folks in that like observability is more than just it's a mission critical product that you can't really live without. And so it's cool that, things like Kevin, what you're working on, are making it more accessible to more people, and perhaps making it easy for me to send double the data, not just save them my current costs. Like it's like I can send double the data and get double the value perhaps, but I don't know. Yeah, still pay a comparable amount.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like the data that you collect from your systems, you collect it because you don't know, like if you have an incident, you might need it. You can improve. You need to diagnose, debug, improve your performance. It can give you product analytics. It's like the source of truth. I think there's actually a lot more for as much observability data that we're collecting. You can probably collect a lot more and actually make a lot better use of it. I actually don't see kind of the distinction. Like right now, we have this sense of there's observability data and there's product data and there's all this other stuff. But really, like, it can all just kind of be the same thing. And I think you're starting to see this with like modern data lakes where kind of you're commingling observability data, with product data, and this idea of like, hey, it's all relevant, like maybe like the number of tickets you're getting in your BI system will benefit from being correlated to actually like the latency numbers you're getting from like fulfilling orders. But right now, like everything is siloed. I mean, like, for God's sake, we're still trying to correlate observability data by itself. Like, can you correlate a log with a trace? Never mind, like taking your observability data and commingling that with your product data. And one last thing I'll add on terms of like us sending more data. I would definitely say like one thing that has been a huge boom to observability vendors, and I've talked with a bunch of observability folks at all the different companies, is Kubernetes. An empty Kubernetes cluster that does absolutely nothing will still send you like 500,000 metrics. It has absolutely exploded in terms of the amount of data that you need to send, and you don't know what is useful. And so you can actually graph this trend of the rise of Kubernetes with the rise of profits from essentially vendors, because the amount of data that is being sent because of Kubernetes, because of microservices, is increasing exponentially, and everyone's just sending it.
Yeah, that is really interesting. On your first note about the product analytics thing, we get that a lot, like from our customers, where most of the time we sell to like an engineering team or like an operations kind of team, right? But occasionally we'll get one person that asks like, "Hey, can I see what pages are the most active on my site?" And we have that data, right? So I do see a future world where, given the accessibility of building like an observability company today, it's actually, you can go further much faster than you could when maybe Datadog existed, And that's, I think, a good thing for the industry, because it's like, you don't have to necessarily use Datadog. It's giving you more optionality, Yeah. How much does Nimbus cost?
Yeah, so our model is essentially we only make money if we help you cut costs. So we have a basic usage ingest fee of 10 cents per gigabyte. And then anything else is based on a percentage of savings. And so for Datadog, for example, it's based on the number of events that we help you reduce. So if you were sending, let's say, 100 million events, we help you reduce 80 million events. Then whatever those 80 million events would cost you at Datadog, we will take 30% of that.
Cool. Understood. This sort of reminds me of Cribble. And I think we've also talked about Cribble. But how do you differentiate yourself against like a Cribble or an Edge Delta or those types of observability companies?
Yeah, Cobalt's really interesting. I think they've definitely been the most successful company in terms of like this observability pipeline space. They were started by a bunch of ex-Splunk guys, and their original value prop is we help you save money off of Splunk. And people pay a lot. And so that's really worked out well for them. I would say the main differentiator between us and Cribble and everyone else is all the other providers, they essentially give you the building blocks. They have an agent that you can install, that you can configure, and then figure it out for yourself. Like, what do I want to drop? And come up with filters, and come up with rules, and come up with routing. And generally, the way they save you money is also like that, figuring out like, okay, I'm going to drop all my debug logs. For Nimbus, we essentially you can think of us as a more turnkey solution. We don't need you to configure anything besides the initial step of sending your logs to your endpoint instead of your vendor endpoint. Once you do that, we will analyze your traffic out of band so it doesn't affect your latency. And then we will essentially find these log groupings that we talked about earlier of similar logs, and then essentially present you in our Nimbus console with optimizations that our engine has provided that shows you also a before and after of, hey, this is your logs before, this is how your logs would look like after, this is how much you would save. Click this one button to apply, or you can kind of tweak it if you want to. And we find that it works much better for most cases, because at the end of the day, most people don't want to muck around with their observability system. They basically just want it to work. And that's kind of the principle that we take is we're very turnkey. We do almost everything for you. And all you have to do for ending up like using Nimbus is to go to the console when we have new results and click the accept button to get started.
Got it. Got it. What happens on the back end when I send you my data in terms of you like reducing latency for it getting to the ultimate destination of Datadog or whatever vendor it is?
What do you mean by that? Like
How is
reducing
it built?
latency?
Yeah, like how is it built in a way that, well, I think you mentioned something about it not there not being much latency. I don't know exactly what you said then, but you said, like, in other words, if I send data to you and you're a proxy before it goes to Datadog,
Mhm.
um, how have you made it such that you're reducing the amount of time it gets to Datadog? And like, are there any? Do you hear that from customers at all, where they're worried about that sort of thing?
So we don't reduce the amount of time because, I mean, at the end of the day, you're adding an extra hop
Sure, sure. Sorry, I didn't
before you.
mean that. I mean
Yeah,
reduce, like minimize the amount of time. That's what I meant, not reduce. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, the way that we minimize is essentially so we're actually built on top of Vector, so it's a REST-based observability pipeline.
got it.
And by default, when we accept logs, I mean, we proxy it. So, and it takes on average under 100 milliseconds for it to be ingested in our pipeline, processed, and then sent to wherever you've configured your logging destination. Um, and I mean, a large part of that is just due to Vector's architecture of being high performance. And in terms of if you actually, for logs that we aggregate, like there is going to be added latency because we're aggregating it until certain criteria are met.
Yeah,
That's usually maximum number of events, or its total size, or a whole bunch of other kind of stop criterion, which is completely controllable by you as a customer. And people usually find that's a great trade-off because when you start off, everything basically just goes through. As you find logs that you think are great aggregation targets, then we aggregate them within the parameters that you've kind of specified. And then we also have a special bypass mode where for high priority logs, we just don't aggregate. By
got
default,
it.
that starts off with error logs. But then depending on your business specific needs, that can be other things. So we have some customers, for example, that like for the bulk of like their customer orders, they just want to aggregate them, but they have like 2 or 3 high value customers that they never want to aggregate. And so they specified a bypass where certain customer IDs are always ignored in aggregation.
Understood.
So essentially, like it just goes down to like the pipeline itself doesn't really add much latency. And then for the logs that we aggregate, that is very tunable to exactly what you want to aggregate and when you want to stop aggregating. And we have these bypass rules on top that make sure that anything you deem as mission critical always goes through right away.
So going back to our original point, Kevin, about like comparing to something like Cribble. So Cribble, you say, basically gives you like an agent that you run on your infrastructure. Yeah.
Yes. So I believe that they also now do multiple modalities. They have a cloud product as well as an on-prem product.
Oh, but originally it was just on-prem and they would go to these big
I believe so.
companies. Oh, okay. That is very interesting. That's very interesting. And have you heard from your customers that they want to run it on-prem?
We have heard from some of our customers. I mean, the customers we have now are happy with having us manage it.
Yeah.
There is quite a lot involved in managing an observability pipeline,
Yeah.
just because your log data, that's what you need in case of an incident. You can think of it as tier 0 data, like you basically can never go down.
Yeah.
And so making sure that something that is highly available, highly durable, and can also scale arbitrarily depending on your volume is it does take some operational headroom to
Sure.
to set up.
Yeah.
And so our customers are happy letting us manage it, but we have, been in talks with bigger companies where they do want to manage it. And that's more around data privacy, compliance requirements, and, other matters.
Got it. Got it. What is your journey with Nimbus, Kevin? Like, how long have you been working on it so far? And yeah, what made you originally want to do it?
Yeah, so Nimbus has been a fun destination. So I started doing startups around 3.5 years ago. So I was part of the YC Winter 21 batch. That was the COVID batch, where everything was remote, done in Zoom. And originally, and at that point, we were in developer tools. We were making an open source Notion competitor. And yeah, so Dendron. Yeah, Dendron, a better way to know. And it was an open source Notion competitor that was integrated into the IDE and essentially helped you work with kind of your company like knowledge base, more like how you would with code. And we gave you a bunch of um, powerful, essentially like tooling to help you refactor and organize and manage kind of your notes at scale. And we worked on that for 2.5 years, and we got pretty decent usage. We had over 100,000 installs. We had a really great community and user base, but ultimately we didn't have a business model that translated into real revenue, and kind of realized that the product we were building wasn't really compatible with essentially a venture-backed business. And so decided to shut that down, made a few pivots, like explored the space, and eventually kind of decided that what we wanted to build was something that had more, I would say, like both product market fit as well as founder product fit. And so for me, like my background's in infrastructure, and I knew that I wanted to do something in infra. And initially that wasn't Nimbus. That was more of like, oh, let's, make it easier for people to run AWS, like AWS with guardrails. But then talking to a bunch of companies, it was, hey, the people that didn't want to run AWS were already using Heroku or Vercel. And then otherwise they would be using AWS. And then there are companies trying to make it work in the middle ground, but I just, didn't find that to be like immediately a problem. But then through those interviews, everybody had observability issues. And kind of digging into that, it was like, oh, they're like paying a lot for observability. And then the second idea was, oh, like, holy crap, like people pay a lot. Like we can build something that is orders of magnitude cheaper. And I'm sure you guys realize that as well. And I think the difference though is I wasn't talking to a lot of companies. We found that a lot of people were complaining about Datadog, for example. But nobody wanted to switch. They're like, we've put in so much effort. We don't really want to migrate. And instead they would use all these kind of hacky solutions of dropping logs, dropping metrics, deciding certain systems are just not going to be monitored, and essentially bend over backwards to kind of appease the quota. And at that point realized like, okay, like maybe let's not fight this, but let's just meet people where they are. That people optimize with guardrails, with a system already in place that can do it more efficiently at scale.
I also feel like before in previous companies I've worked on, I didn't understand I guess first of all, how hard it was, right? And so when you don't understand that, you think that, oh, I just want to start a company. But I think reality is if you want to do it for a long time, you really need to like and love what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? So that's
Absolutely.
cool.
I mean, I think I went into it thinking of like, if this failed, would I still feel like the time was worthwhile?
Yeah, yeah. Kevin, where can people find more about your company and find more about you?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Ray. So about the company, you can check us out as Nimbus.dev. There you'll find essentially everything about what we do, including demo videos, documentations, and as well as a sign-up link or essentially contact details, which everything goes to me, and I generally respond to everything.
Cool.
Otherwise, you can find me on the socials, LinkedIn, or Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. I'm very reachable.
Awesome. And Kevin, what is your link to your blog? Because I know you write every once in a while, and stuff is pretty popular. I think that's how we originally got in contact, actually.
Yeah. So the blog, I'll share it I'm sure it'll be in the show notes, but it's at bit.kevineslin.com.
Sounds great.
So yeah, it's a Substack. I write about observability, among other things. And It's been a while since I've posted, but I've been meaning to write some more this year.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks for coming by, Kevin. This was really fun. Yeah, it's I feel like we've been talking to a lot of technical people, but not necessarily technical people in the observability world. So this is nice and refreshing. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, I had fun. Thanks for having me.